Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Booktopia podcast. My name is Mark Harding. I'm Content and Brand Manager for Booktopia.
And I'm Ben Hunter, the Fiction Category Manager.
And we're introducing you to a very special podcast that we were lucky enough to record with the one and only David Mitchell.
It was a hell of a chat and a little strange. He talks about his new novel, Utopia Avenue, which is a must-read, I have to say. Mark and I have both read it, and now having spoken to the man himself, we're pretty much in love, and I think you will be too. Without further ado, Mark, let's leave him to it.
So, hello, David Mitchell, and welcome to the Booktopia Books podcast. We're really thrilled to have you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
So let's get right into it. First question. Your books are often grounded in a very distinct sense of time. In this case, you've chosen the iconic 1960s. When you're choosing to set a book in a certain era, do you make conscious choices to say something about our current times through that era? Or are you more focused on a tone or a motif? And what drew you to the 1960s?
Well, there were three crafty questions smuggled into that one there. I'll try and do my best for all of them. What draws me? Well, I wanted to write about music. I wanted to write about young pioneers of music, of a particular kind of music. And 1967, 1968 seemed to me it kind of chose itself. It's pretty much the only window where the sort of band I would be interested in curating into being could have plausibly existed. Anything earlier than 67, then it just wouldn't have rung true that my band could have been that experimental, that Sgt. Pepper's influenced before, say, Sgt. Pepper's had happened, that psychedelic in origin as well. Before psychedelia had happened, you can see that it just wouldn't really have been plausible. Then I'm sorry, what was I slightly got lost with
no, that's okay. Sorry,
question,
it was a convoluted question. My other question was whether you're making a conscious choice to use an era to say something about the times we're currently living in, or whether you're just kind of more attracted to a tone or a motif of that era.
Kind of neither. If I'm if you'll let me kick the tires of your question a little bit,
Sure.
It's more a case that you don't really have to try to artificially sort of crank modern day relevancy into historical work. If you're writing about human beings being human, then it's always relevant. If you're writing about society, then it's always relevant. We always live in one. The costumes and the stage settings shift from era to era, but I think the fundamental mechanics and of human relationships and electronics of society, of the power structures, these are pretty universal. I mean, and I think this is why literature works. It's why the arts are relevant across decades and centuries. The external appearances can change, but I think what's underneath those appearances don't really. So yeah, that is my tire kick of an answer to your very good question.
David, was the novel driven just by sheer delight in the music and the scene, or did you set out from the start to explore the heart of counterculture and its kind of crash into oblivion and immortality?
Again, I think you can do both. Yes, it was an exuberant and exciting time when it was widely believed by a critical mass of mostly young people, but not exclusively, that just by thinking, by dreaming, you could substantially reboot and recalibrate consumerist society. Anything was up for grabs. It was all in the air. You could throw what you wanted at the wall and see what stuck. If you could conceive of doing it, you could do it. That was, I think, that was in the air. And of course, that's an exciting time to live in. And if you're not living in it, then it's an exciting time to write about. And of course, it has a trajectory. It's a plot. We're looking back at it, and we know what happened next, which is, in reality, it wasn't viable. It did hit speed bumps and pretty soon brick walls, and LSD was not this sort of widespread panacea that would elevate human beings to a new plane of existence, at least not for most people. And pretty soon it resulted in the Syd Barretts of the scene in acid burnout. It's just one example of what branches of the counterculture might have espoused. However, of course, we also have the historical perspective to see that a lot of seeds were planted and by the counterculture, which subsequently germinated into organisms that grew and have substantially shifted the narrative from then to now. LGBTQ rights can trace their origins back to that time. The idea of drug rehabilitation being a thing rather than some fanciful wacko pipe dream. Civil rights for all, legal aid, serious social effort to fix problems like homelessness. Many aspects of the modern world which we take for granted, you can look back and find their origins in times like the late 60s, when some kind of a door opens, some kind of a door to the future, some kind of a door to possibilities which just weren't widely enough subscribed to until those times happen. This is this is another long rambling answer to your concise question, but if I'm making some kind of sense, then I will float my answer your way across the bridge of Skype to the Antipodes. There you go.
So I think it's fairly safe to assume that you've done a deep dive into the bands of the era in creating Utopia Avenue. Are there any lesser known or lost albums of this period that gave you inspiration? And was there anything in particular that you listened to while crafting the novel?
Whoa, thank you. Well, I will do my best to turn your concise question into something, into another complex, rambling answer. Of course, I love the music of the time. Many albums I revisited or discovered for the first time. Of course, most of them have floated out of my head right now. So what I will do on my laptop is have a look at Spotify, where I have some public playlists, Utopia Avenue and then Utopia Avenue 2 and 3. And what do I find? Dusty in Memphis album by Dusty Springfield, a glorious thing. We've got Sandy Denny, who I knew of before I started the novel, but what a beautiful singer. She was in the classic lineup of Fairport Convention, which was another name that I knew, but I didn't know as well, certainly, as I do now. Nick Drake, his wonderful, tragic singer-songwriter.
Yes.
Tragic because he died young, but also kind of transcendent because his albums have subsequently been rediscovered, and they're just wonderful.
Yes.
Some lesser known folk singers, Anne Briggs, a singer called Bridget St. John, or Bridget St. John, who I also had never heard of. I reevaluated Syd Barrett's Pink Floyd, which sort of eclipsed by what the band did in the 70s without him. But that first album, The Piper from the Gates of Dawn, is in a sort of semi-juvenilia way, is really interesting as well. Is that enough of a sort of a cluster of names for you, or shall I go on?
No, I actually, while you were talking, I pulled up the playlist on Spotify, and I love that you've included "Listen to the Flower People" by Spinal Tap.
Oh yeah, yeah. That has been well. The Utopia Avenue 2 and 3 playlists were mostly crowdsourced via Spotify, so I owe my I owe people who follow my account most of the credit for most of these songs. Uh, Incense and Peppermints by Strawberry Alarm Clock. Only in 1967,
Classic.
only in 1968. I think that's on the Austin Powers soundtrack.
David, could you briefly describe the four musical wizards that have disparately come together in your novel to form the band Utopia Avenue? And could you tell us if there's one in particular that you maybe identify with the most?
I'll do my best, thank you, to describe my four children, the flower children. So, as you say, they've been brought together by me in the novel, but that's inside the novel by a canny Canadian manager called Levon. They haven't formed organically like most bands did by knowing one another at school or from art college or somewhere. And I did this to try to, well, because it's sort of the band I've been most interested in. They've come from really different backgrounds. I'll start with Elf. I wanted some female energy in the band, so the changing rooms didn't smell overpoweringly of testosterone. Elf Holloway is she's a English middle class folk singer. She plays keyboards in the band, and she sort of has issues with her family, who really don't think this is a respectable thing for a young lady to be doing in the late 1960s. She sings and writes. A lot of her character DNA is drawn from Sandy Denny, who was in a similar situation, who as I mentioned earlier, was in Fairport Convention for the classic lineup. I then tried to camouflage her origins by having Sandy Denny appear as a cameo in the novel as well. So that's Elf. Dean is a working class boy from the other side of London, from the East End, where the fumes would blow and the effluents would drift down the river. He's from Gravesend. He's more of an R&B background. There'd be something of Davis Brothers, who were kind of the founding and creative force in the band The Kinks. Quite earthy. What he has in common with David Bowie is that he just can't have the same kind of life as the lives of those he can't have the life that his socioeconomic origins would condemn him to as he sees it. He has to make this work. He just can't live like his parents live. He has to climb a ladder to something
the most
more
ambitious, isn't he?
Yeah. I think he is. He has furthest to climb in terms of the class ladder. So that's him. Then already near the top of the class ladder is Jasper de Zoet. He's got blue-blooded Dutch origins, although he was also illegitimate. That mattered more in those days and was still a thing. He's also got an interesting relationship with reality. He either has been visited by voices in his head, by other presences if they're real, or he's schizophrenic if they're not real, and that's either true or not true, depending on whether you've read another of my books or whether you believe a psychiatrist who's in the novel. And then finally there's the drummer, Griff. I should have said Dean is the bassist. He also writes and sings. Jasper is a sort of virtuoso guitarist. If you could combine Nick Drake and Jimi Hendrix, then you'd get Jasper, as I'm saying, or maybe Peter Green, Fleetwood Mac, from an earlier version of Fleetwood Mac. Griffin is the drummer. and he's from Yorkshire, which is sort of outside the class system altogether. It's simply Yorkshire, and say there'd be some Ginger Baker in him. He's got some jazz. He's got some jazz origins in where he learnt his trade. Maybe Mick Fleetwood as well. He can a little bit Ringo-y perhaps, but yeah, maybe more Ginger Baker. He's kind of the wild man of the group in some ways, but yeah, that's him. Which one do I feel most attracted to, or most affinity with? All of them, but maybe Jasper's the dreamer of the band, I think, and maybe I can identify with that more closely. So if I have to choose one at gunpoint, then I'd say Jasper. But if you're not waving a gun in my direction, then all of them.
Good. I think I'd agree myself.
And we wouldn't wave a gun in your direction, but same question, but kind of for your pantheon of characters that you've created through your career, is there a particular character that you relate to more or that you think about more than some others?
The involuntary immortal Marinus is probably the only one who what's the right way to put it? Marinus is an ongoing project. What he/she is and what he/she is for is probably most central to this rambling, expanding thing that all my books are adding up to. So probably the one-word answer is Marinus. However, I wouldn't rule any of them out. Anyone I've ever written might come back again one day. But I know Marinus will be around for a while, so probably he/she or they would be the answer to the question, yeah.
Excellent choice.
And David, you've written a phone book's worth of celebrity appearances into Utopia Avenue. We have everyone from Mama Cass Elliot to David Bowie, a young David Bowie at that. Is it fun to bring those personalities to life as an author, or is it terrifying to do justice to them, or is it both?
Thank you. Yeah, it's both. Terrifying, not quite, but I do. It behoves me to remember that they were real people and they have living relatives and many fans, and you can't take liberties with them, and you can't give them major things to do that would alter their own lives and biographies. They're not mine to co-opt. That's what I'd like to say. That said, they were key figures to a very vibrant scene, and I do depict that scene, and it would be odd to omit all of them. They were at those parties, they were in those clubs, they were at those bars, they were trying to climb the same ladder that my characters are climbing, so they would have known one another. So I'm not kind of racked with guilt about having them in the book either. I don't want them to be just there for eye candy or for kind of bird spotting effect. I want them to be substantial enough to, say, alter the trajectory, not of the book, but of a scene, or to change the mood in a scene, or to impart some knowledge or some information that is relevant to one of my fictional characters in a scene. So it's a question of sort of defining the bandwidth within which they operate, not too influential but not trivial either, and keeping them there, and also just getting them right, by which I mean, if I'm going to have them appear in my novel, then they need to speak as they really spoke, which luckily you can find out by studying the speech patterns and vocabulary on YouTube, and by reading either their own memoirs if they wrote one, or a good biography about them, if not, and often both, So that's my answer to your concise question. I did pretty well with that one. It was under 2 minutes, I think.
So Utopia Avenue sits happily between the real and the fantastical. As you've discussed, there's lots of cameos from people who really existed, but it's balanced with hints of kind of the broader supernatural battling that is happening in the background of all your books, and kind of quite explicit in some, like the Bone Cloaks. What draws you to and from the deeper realms of the fantastical or supernatural in your writing?
Oh, what draws me? I mean, a flippant answer would be, I'm drawn there because I'm me. And maybe that's not flippant. It just sort of postpones the question, which is, well, how come then? How come you being you draws you to the fantastical? It's maybe there in my formative compost heap, the TV shows I watched when I was a kid, the books that really got me into reading and kind of thence into writing. To name names, Ursula Le Guin's books, Susan Cooper's books, certain superbly written fantasy novels that were in the much smaller than it is now children's bookshelves in the bookshops that I would have browsed in the late 70s, early 80s, spending my birthday book tokens and Christmas pound notes. It was those books I went for. So those books were sort of in my early diet, which maybe engender a lifelong fondness for the genre, but also it's there in several sets of inverted commas here, serious literature as well. The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Many of the Russian heavyweights, Gogol, had a fantastical gene. Many kind of, you can find the same gene in world literature, I think. It's there in Peter Carey, since we're in Australia at the moment. It's there in Salman Rushdie in Latin American magical realism. What is that if not fantastical? So I know it sort of has a name as a genre. 19th century work as well. Robert Louis Stevenson. Even in Dickens, the laws of reality are often bent and sometimes snapped before being kind of splintered up again at the end. I know that sure, there is the genre fantasy, which sort of on the notional hierarchy doesn't necessarily occupy an esteemed position, but I think that's slightly defunct thinking. If it's good, it's good. If a narrative is well written and engrossing, then who cares whether it has dragons or not? Who cares whether it has immortals in it or not? Is how I think. I've answered your question. What draws me? Because I'm me, and that's why, perhaps. It's sometimes the fantastic can be an interesting angle of incidence to examine realism. You can examine mortality from the realist side, but maybe you have a different perspective if you examine mortality from the perspective of an immortal. What kind of an immortal? An involuntary immortal, or a more vampiric, predatory immortal? It takes you into interesting thematic zones, I find. So maybe these are why I do it. Hey, thank you. I do my best.
Speaking of immortality, your fiction, it interlinks. All your books, all your novels, they you read along the way, and longtime fans will just encounter Easter eggs of prior novels of your writing. When you write in those connections, is it a self-conscious way that you're signaling to the reader that you know that they're viewing you as one big amorphous lump of David Mitchell, or is it for something else?
I've never been called a big amorphous lump before, and I like it. I'm going to get a T-shirt with "big amorphous lump" written on it and wear it with pride. Yeah, it's other things. I mean, I was doing it before I had fans, if I can use that word, or certainly before I had a readership. I'll give you a list of reasons. In the first instance, I did it because I enjoyed it when writers like Haruki Murakami also do it. I like that throb of recognition. Secondly, a character you've already used / met / read before, they don't come as tabula rasas, they don't come as blank slates. They bring luggage with them, and you can unzip that backpack and spill out the luggage, and it does things. It has theme, it has tone, it weighs a scene a bit differently if you have a shared past with someone. It's a difference between a beer with an old friend and someone you're meeting at a speed date for the first time. And of course the new narrative has, so the prime directive is that my books aren't installments. They have to work independently, and I'm always very careful that they do work independently. But if, as it happens, you have read other books and you're meeting a character again, then, as it happens, they will be bringing stuff to the new book. Third reason, all this lets me be a maximalist and a minimalist at the same time. I started out drooling over maps of Middle-earth. I started out wanting to write something as big as Isaac Asimov's Foundation books. You know, these books at first, these genre novels that first really got me into reading, or at least they were published as genre novels. And I would just sort of internally oscillate at the very idea of just writing something that cathedral. Is there an adjective of cathedral? That cathedralic, that cathedral-esque, that big. Yet, as I got older, my curiosity ran off in lots of different directions down very different rabbit holes. And I also wanted to write a short, focused cycle of ghost stories. I also wanted to write a historical novel set in a very specific location in Nagasaki Harbour at the end of the 18th century. I also wanted to do very specific things, say write a book about the milieu in which I grew up in, a small English village in Nowhereshire in the year of the Falklands War. So I also wanted to do these very specific things. Now, what I'm doing with the, I used to call it an Uber novel, but then Uber was a thing, so I kind of just think of cheap rides in foreign cities now. But say a meta novel. The meta novel lets me do both. It lets me build something lifelong in scale, but also let me be quite. It also lets me be very specific about the times and places and locations of the novels as well. And then finally, I've most recently become aware that the meta novel is lining up some kind of a meta novel in the future, where it's as if all of the books are creating pieces for a kind of a game, a kind of a chess game. It's not chess, but it'll be some kind of a intertangled intergame that will give me the raw material of quite a chunky novel in the future. I think there may be other reasons why I do it as well that I just haven't become apparent yet, or maybe don't even exist yet. But I've started, so I'll finish, as contestants on the BBC quiz show Mastermind, or as the quizmaster used to say. Maybe still does.
When the Bowden Clocks came out, you gave an interview to The Guardian in which you said that you had your next 5 books planned out. So since then, you've put out Slade House and now Utopia Avenue. Are the next 3 books still mapped, or has the plan changed?
Maybe I was flattering myself a little bit with that quote. 5 is maybe kind of like 3, but with possible ideas for another 3, say. So there's
so
that.
You're committing to 6 now on our podcast. Is that what you're
saying? You're outdoing the Guardian. Say I would commit to 3 firmly and say another 3 vaguely. Then planned out is also a little bit of a stretch, perhaps. I know some of the scenes that will happen in them. I've got some of the stem cells, but I don't quite know how. Well, in some cases, and the further into the future, kind of in this queue that we go, the vaguer I get. But I don't know exactly what will be happening in any of them, but I know parts of what will be happening in some of them, and ideas about the world in which I'll set them as well. If I live that long, I can't take anything for granted. But yeah, if I'm still around, I don't think I'll ever run out of ideas. That's the thing. I can't see that happening. Over.
With the albums and the songs that are featured in Utopia Avenue, do you have a clear idea in your head of what those songs are, what they sound like, the melodies, the instrumentation? Do you hum them around the house when you're doing the housework?
This is the fictional songs that the band write, you mean?
Yeah,
sure. Well, in the beginning, I thought, let's just drape discrete veils over these songs, because no song I could ever write or refer to would be as good as the imaginary song in the reader's mind. And I did that for about 100 pages, but then it started to feel a bit weird that no lines from the songs were ever appearing. You know, this is the bread and butter of the band. It's also that manna from heaven for the band. It's also what the band live with. It's their creative space. So it was starting to feel artificial that I was never referring to any of the lyrics of the song. So I started to put them in. And of course, I have to keep descriptions quite short, because descriptions of music they quickly become as dull as other people's descriptions of their dreams. They're really interesting for about 3 lines, but 3 lines is about all you've got, and then you drop off a cliff. So within those limits, yes, I had to know what the band, what the songs sound like, because I had to write them. However, also as because of the pandemic, there were no book tours, no festivals. So instead of that, I've been putting a lot of energy into what they call in the music business added content or extra content. And so I've also written all the lyrics for all the songs on the first album, whether or not those lyrics appear in the book or not. So because of that, I've developed a much clearer idea. It's just those lyrics exist outside the book. If, who knows, a TV show ever happened, then I can obviously use them again, because unlike novels, TVs have speakers, so you can actually hear the songs. In fact, you have to hear something, so you can't get away at all with a blank space where the songs are, in the same way you can with text with novels. So when writing those songs, I would I'm not a songwriter, I'm not a professional musician, and I've never been in a band, so I needed some help urgently. And looking through a good book about songwriting, I found a suggestion, and actually hearing Paul McCartney speak on interviews. One time-honored model is to nick an existing song and then write lyrics for that song as if it's yours, and in doing so changes will creep in because certain lines you want to get in won't fit. So there'll be some drift away from the starting point anyway. And so I did that, and I could sort of name particular songs or particular template songs for the lyrics I wrote and sort of transposed over them. But because you haven't seen the lyrics in question, because they're not yet in the public realm, it probably wouldn't make any sense. But so more than I would have done 2 months ago is the answer to your question.
You should put them online somewhere. Put them in a blog and put it out there so session musicians around the world can start strumming to your lyrics, making up songs you've never dreamt of.
That would be a huge kick. Random House will be doing something with them. I think in the first instance they're sort of available for pre-orders or something like that. But then the internet being the internet, I doubt they'll stay that secret for very long, which is
very
fine.
Good. I have one last very serious question. In your opinion, David, what is the greatest musical achievement of the 1960s era, and why was it Herman Hermit's 1965 self-titled album?
That was a good title. I mean, that was a good album for 1965, and I know the one you mean. By 1968, by 1969, it was looking like something from the 30s. Yeah. Which kind of goes, which in a nice top and tail of the interview away takes us right back to the beginning. Kind of, those were such fast-moving years. Every 6 months had a decade of musical development in normal times. The same way, actually, right now, the era we're in, every 6 months feels like 10 years worth of history in more apparently ordinary times. However, one, of course, is impossible, just impossible. I'll throw Sergeant Pepper's back at you, knowing that it's impossible to say anything original about that album. It's like Venice. You just can't write anything. You can't. It's impossible to write an original sentence about it. It's been so pored over and analysed. I'll try to surprise you with a less obvious one, which would be the first Joni Mitchell album, Song to a Seagull, which was recorded by David Crosby, and which is always said he messed up with the recording levels, but I would disagree and say that what he did was a happy accident. I think it sounds strange and eerie and great, and it sort of established, to my mind at least, the flawed singer-songwriter album that took root and in some ways is still with us in say singers like Billie Eilish, who I know co-writes with her brother, but it's this sort of intimate confessional mode of songwriting has been a strand that took root then, arguably, and it's all arguably, it's all subjective, but which has informed popular music since then in ways that make it impossible to imagine the world without these kinds of songs. Dylan was doing it as well, but there's something about Joni Mitchell that the lifting of the roof off a dark room and just flooding all the nooks and crannies with light and turning those into songs. Just the way she did it, the license she gives poets to put their work to music, the unembarrassed nature of the poetry of the lyrics. She was still, and I like the fact it's flawed. It's not Blue by Joni Mitchell. It's not it's you can still see her learning her craft. You can still see her slightly going down cul-de-sacs and taking slight missteps and doing things slightly wrong. There's nothing like a Salieri to teach you how to do Mozart, and to mix in a little bit of the former with the latter, I think, is really instructive. And it's an album my first girlfriend had a copy, so it's sort of way back at the beginning of my life as an adult as well, and it's still here now, and I'll still play it, I think, until my deathbed, which hopefully isn't anytime soon, but hey, you never know. Which is the second time I said that. It's something clearly on my mind at the moment. We
now appreciate this time together even more, David. This has been a real thrill.
It's been a real downer, mate. That's what I should say thank you too for having me on Booktopia, for having me on Booktopia Avenue, for having me on your podcast, and for the effort and the concentration and the diligence you brought, and the professionalism that you brought to my slightly long and winding road of a set of answers. But I've enjoyed myself very much. Stay well, and I've suddenly taken over as a presenter, haven't I? I kind of do this a bit. So from all of us at Booktopia to everyone at home, thanks for listening and thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you next time for the next episode, which is when, guys? Over to you. Who's on your next episode?
Thank you so much, David. I don't. I'd have to ask our producer who's on next. Where does the
I've really enjoyed myself, guys. Thanks for having me, and when all this is in the past and I can get over to Australia again, then hunt me down, kick my shins, and say hello.
We will apart from the kicking.
Thanks a lot, then.
Thanks so much, David. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks
again. Same here. Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening. If you liked the sound of our chat and you liked the sound of Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell, you can buy it right now on booktopia.com.au, along with all of David's other wonderful novels. Right now, booktopia.com.au.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free, and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast, and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.